My name is Victoria Hayes, and at 38 years old, I stood at my mother's funeral watching my sister, Isabel, walk through those doors with that same smug smile she'd worn 6 years ago when she destroyed my life. She had no idea that the man standing beside me, my husband, was about to make her world crumble in ways she never saw coming. You see, when Isabel stole Damien Cross, my millionaire fiancé, she thought she'd won everything. What she didn't know was that she'd actually handed me the keys to something far more valuable. By the end of this day, watching her face drain of all color when she realized exactly who I'd married, I understood that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about how losing everything can sometimes be the greatest gift you never knew you needed. 6 years ago, my life looked perfect on paper. I was 32, a successful marketing executive living in a sleek downtown Denver apartment with the kind of career trajectory that made my parents beam with pride. My mother, Catherine, had always been my anchor, the woman who taught me that grace under pressure wasn't just a saying, it was a way of life. Even after moving out, I called her every single day. She was my confidant, my voice of reason, and the person who believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. Then I met Damien Cross at a charity gala, and suddenly everything clicked into place. He was 36, devastatingly handsome, with the kind of confidence that filled every room he entered. A self-made tech millionaire who'd built his empire from nothing, Damien had that magnetic quality that made people gravitate toward him. Our connection was instant and electric. Within minutes of meeting, we were deep in conversation about art, travel, and the kind of ambitious dreams that most people only whisper about. Our first date lasted until 3 a.m. We talked over dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant, then walked along the river, then ended up at his penthouse, where we continued talking until sunrise. I'd never experienced anything like it, that feeling of finding someone who truly understood you. When I called my mother the next day, I could barely contain my excitement. "I think I met him, Mom," I said, pacing around my apartment like a teenager. "The one." Catherine laughed, that warm sound that always made everything feel right. "Tell me everything, sweetheart." And I did. Every detail, every moment, every feeling. She listened with the patience only a mother could have, asking the right questions and making the right observations. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He sounds wonderful, Victoria, but remember—" "I know, Mom. Take it slow. Get to know him. Don't lose myself in the relationship." "Exactly. You're a smart, successful woman. Don't forget that." But taking it slow proved impossible with Damien. Our relationship moved at lightning speed, and honestly, I didn't want to slow it down. Weekend trips to Aspen, private box seats at the symphony, intimate dinners at restaurants that required months-long reservations, Damien made me feel like I was living in a fairy tale. He was attentive and generous, always surprising me with thoughtful gifts that showed he actually listened when I talked. Fresh peonies, because I'd mentioned they were my favorite. A first-edition copy of The Great Gatsby, because he'd noticed it on my bookshelf. Tickets to see my favorite band perform in a city I'd always wanted to visit. After 18 months together, during a private dinner on a yacht he'd rented for the evening, Damien proposed. The ring was a 5-carat diamond that caught the moonlight like captured starfire. I said yes without hesitation, my heart so full I thought it might burst. My parents were over the moon. Dad actually teared up, which was something I'd seen maybe 3 times in my entire life. Mom immediately started planning, her excitement infectious as she talked about venues and flowers and the perfect dress. Damien had the resources to make any wedding dream come true, and Catherine insisted we shouldn't hold back. "You only get one first wedding," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Let's make it unforgettable." Then there was Isabel, my sister, 2 years younger and infinitely more complicated. Growing up, our relationship had been a constant push and pull. She was beautiful, charming, and had this magnetic personality that drew people in. But she also had this need to compete with me over everything: grades, friends, attention, boyfriends. If I achieved something, she had to match or exceed it. If I wanted something, suddenly she wanted it too. Mom always tried to keep the peace between us, giving us each special time and attention. Despite our complicated history, When it came time to choose a maid of honor, I chose Isabel. Mom thought it would bring us closer, and honestly, I wanted to believe that as adults, we'd moved beyond childish sibling rivalry. When I brought Damien to meet my family for the first time, Isabel was her most charming self. She complimented him excessively, laughed at all his jokes, and found excuses to touch his arm while talking. I noticed, but I dismissed it as Isabel being her usual charismatic self. She was dating someone, a pharmaceutical rep named Brian, and seemed happy enough. We held our engagement party at my parents' beautiful colonial home. Isabel helped Mom with the decorations, hanging fairy lights across the backyard and arranging flowers. Throughout the evening, I caught her watching Damien from across the room. When our eyes met, she'd quickly smile and raise her glass in my direction. But my mother noticed too. "Victoria, dear," she said later that night as we cleaned up, carefully arranging leftover appetizers into containers. I noticed Isabel seems quite taken with Damien. I was washing champagne flutes in the sink, trying to process the same observation. "She's just being friendly, Mom. Besides, she's with Brian." Mom nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Just be careful, honey. You know how your sister can get when you have something she admires." I kissed her cheek, forcing confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We're adults now, Mom. Isabel's happy for me, I'm sure of it." How spectacularly wrong I was. How completely, devastatingly, life-alteringly wrong. 3 months before our wedding, things started to change. Damien began working later, always with some excuse about international clients or emergency meetings. Our usual Friday date nights were frequently rescheduled due to sudden business crises. When we were together, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and giving me only half his attention. More troubling were the small criticisms that started creeping in. My laugh, which he'd once called infectious, was suddenly too loud in public. My favorite emerald dress, which he'd previously said brought out my eyes, now made me look washed out. Even my habit of reading before bed, which he'd found endearing, became annoying because the light kept him awake. Meanwhile, Isabel started calling more frequently, always with questions about wedding details, though Mom was handling most of the planning. "I just want everything to be perfect for my big sister," she'd say, her voice sweet as honey. She volunteered to help with vendor meetings I couldn't attend due to work. At the time, I was grateful. Now I realized she was positioning herself perfectly. One Thursday evening, Damien and I had dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian place downtown. He barely made eye contact, responding to my stories about work with distracted uh-huhs and "that's nice." When his phone buzzed for the 5th time, I reached my breaking point. "Is there something more important happening elsewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the irritation building in my chest. "Sorry, just work stuff," he muttered, placing his phone face down on the white tablecloth. "You know how it is before a product launch." But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when the phone buzzed again. Something was very wrong. Later that week, I noticed unfamiliar perfume on Damien's collar while doing laundry. It was floral and heavy, nothing like the subtle vanilla scent I wore. When I confronted him, his explanation came too quickly, too practiced. "Rebecca Mills," he said without hesitation. "Potential investor. She wears this overpowering perfume and insisted on hugging goodbye after our meeting." The explanation seemed plausible. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I called my best friend Allison, seeking reassurance over coffee the next morning. "Every relationship gets jittery before the wedding," she said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "Parker and I fought constantly the month before our wedding, and now we've been married 5 years. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't dissolve. Mom noticed my anxiety during our weekly lunch at the little cafe near her house. "You seem distracted, sweetheart," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Wedding stress, or something else?" I forced a smile, not wanting to worry her. "Just busy with final arrangements. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. I started making more effort, thinking perhaps I'd been taking Damien for granted. I booked a spa day, bought new lingerie, tried cooking his favorite meals. The more I tried, the more distant he became. Then came the cake tasting appointment. Damien had been looking forward to it for weeks, talking about different flavors and designs. That morning, he called claiming an unexpected meeting with investors. Isabel can go with you, he suggested casually. She knows my preferences anyway. When I hung up, I felt physically sick. How did my sister know my fiancé's cake preferences better than I did? Still, I accepted her offer. What choice did I have? The next day, while cleaning Damien's car before a dinner party, I found an earring wedged between the passenger seat and center console. A dangling silver earring with a tiny sapphire that I recognized immediately. It was Isabel's. She'd worn those earrings to my engagement party, a gift from our grandmother. My hands shook as I held the small piece of jewelry. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. When I showed Damien the earring that evening, his face remained perfectly composed, too composed. "Oh, your sister must have dropped it when I gave her a ride to the florist last week," he said smoothly. "She mentioned losing an earring." "You never told me you drove Isabel to the florist," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't I? It must have slipped my mind. It wasn't important." When I called Isabel, her explanation matched his perfectly. Too perfectly. "Oh, thank goodness," she exclaimed. "I've been looking everywhere for that earring. Damien was kind enough to drive me since my car was in the shop." That night, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts raced through my mind like pinballs, bouncing off each other and creating a cacophony of doubt. Had they rehearsed their story? Was I being paranoid? My weight began dropping from stress, and dark circles formed under my eyes. I started seeing a therapist without telling Damien, but even professional help couldn't ease the growing dread. 3 weeks before the wedding, Damien suggested we postpone. "I'm worried about you, Victoria," he said, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "You're not yourself lately. Maybe we're rushing things." I broke down, begging him to tell me what was wrong, what I had done, how I could fix it. He held me, assuring me everything was fine, but his embrace felt hollow. His eyes were vacant. That night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find Damien's side of the bed empty. From the hallway, I heard his hushed voice coming from the guest bedroom. "Not now, she'll hear us," he whispered. I know. Soon, I promise." The next day, I decided to surprise him at his office with lunch. Dad called as I was leaving my apartment. "Victoria, are you eating properly?" His gruff voice carried concern. "Your mother says you've lost too much weight. We're concerned." "I'm fine, Dad. Just pre-wedding jitters. I'm actually bringing Damien lunch right now." "Good. That boy better be treating my daughter like a queen." If only he knew. The security guard at Damien's building recognized me and waved me through with a familiar smile. In the elevator to the 12th floor, I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall, trying to smooth the worry lines that had formed between my eyebrows. The lunch bag contained Damien's favorite sandwich from the deli, across from my office, a small gesture to bridge whatever gap had formed between us. When I reached the reception area, Damien's secretary Margot looked up from her computer, her eyes widening with surprise. "Victoria, we weren't expecting you today." Her gaze darted nervously to Damien's closed office door, then back to me. "That's okay," I said, lifting the lunch bag with a smile I hope looked natural. "I just brought him lunch. I can wait." Margot stood quickly, moving to block my path. "Actually, he specifically asked not to be disturbed. Perhaps I could let him know you're here?" Something in her nervous manner triggered every instinct I had. "Is he alone in there?" Margot's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Before she could respond, I walked past her and pushed open Damien's office door. The scene that greeted me burned itself into my memory with crystalline clarity. Damien leaning against his mahogany desk, his hands on my sister's waist. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangled in his dark hair, their lips locked in a passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of countless similar moments. Neither noticed me at first, giving me several excruciating seconds to absorb every devastating detail. Isabel's skirt pushed up, revealing more than it should. Damien's tie loosened, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. The way they moved together, the comfort in their embrace. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a relationship. When the door clicked shut behind me, they sprang apart like guilty teenagers caught by parents. 3 faces frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and something that might have been relief. Damien recovered first, straightening his tie with practiced efficiency. "Victoria, this isn't what it looks like." Isabel didn't even attempt such a transparent lie. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly, meeting my eyes with something that looked almost like satisfaction. We didn't plan this. It just happened. The calm that washed over me was the most surprising part. No screaming, no tears, no dramatic confrontation, just a crystalline clarity that cut through months of confusion and doubt. How long? My voice remained steady, almost conversational. Damien glanced at Isabel, and in that look I saw the truth of their conspiracy. How long? I repeated. For months, Isabel answered when Damien remained silent. Since the engagement party. For months. Nearly half our engagement. While I'd been selecting wedding invitations and choosing floral arrangements, while I'd been excitedly calling vendors and planning our future, they had been betraying me in the most intimate way possible. Damien moved behind his desk, putting physical distance between us as if preparing for a business negotiation. I didn't mean for this to happen, Victoria. Sometimes feelings change. I was going to tell you, he continued, his voice taking on that practiced smoothness he used for difficult client meetings. After? After what? I asked. After the wedding? After our honeymoon? I was trying to find the right time. The lunch bag slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I trusted you. Both of you. Isabel, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable. It just happened, Vic. We tried to fight it. Don't call me Vic. The childhood nickname felt like another violation. And nothing just happens for 4 months. You made choices. Every secret call, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye, knowing what you were doing. Damien pressed the intercom button with the efficiency of a man ending a business meeting. Margot, please come in. Moments later, Margot appeared, pointedly avoiding my gaze. Please escort Victoria out, Damien said. She's upset. I'm escorting myself out, I said, my dignity somehow intact despite feeling shattered inside. I looked at both of them, really looked, and felt something shift inside me. You deserve each other. In the elevator, the tears finally came. By the time I reached my car, I was struggling to breathe between sobs. The drive home passed in a blur. I only remember calling my mother from my apartment bathroom floor, unable to form coherent sentences through my crying. Mom and Dad arrived within the hour, using their emergency key when I couldn't bring myself to open the door. Mom held me while I told them everything, her own tears mixing with mine. Dad paced the living room, his face growing redder with each detail. I'll kill him, he muttered, his hand pressed to his chest. I swear to God, I'll kill him. Thomas, your blood pressure, Mom warned, though her own face showed equal fury. The next days passed in a haze of pain and humiliation. Mom helped me call vendors to cancel wedding arrangements while Dad handled the financial aspects with grim efficiency. When I returned the engagement ring to Damien's apartment, left with the doorman because I couldn't bear to see him, I discovered Isabel had already moved most of her things in. Her clothes hung in the closet that once held mine. Family photos with her face had replaced the ones of us. Damien's email about dividing our shared assets was coldly efficient, mentioning that Isabel had helped him catalog my remaining belongings. The betrayal ran even deeper than I'd initially realized. Through mutual friends, I learned the full scope of their deception. They had been meeting secretly whenever I worked late or traveled for business. Isabel had pursued him deliberately, finding excuses to see him alone, sending texts and photos when I wasn't around. Every family dinner, every casual encounter, she'd been systematically destroying my relationship from the inside. The scandal spread quickly through our social circle. Some friends sided with me, outraged by the betrayal. Others, citing Damien's influence in the business community, found ways to justify their behavior. Several admitted they'd noticed the flirtation but hadn't wanted to get involved. Their cowardice stung almost as much as the original betrayal. Mom became my lifeline during those dark months. She brought food when I couldn't eat, to listen to my tearful rants without judgment, and stayed overnight when the loneliness became unbearable. She tried repeatedly to mediate between Isabel and me, inviting us both to family dinners that inevitably ended in tense silence or bitter arguments. During one such dinner, after weeks of mounting tension, Isabel finally snapped when I refused to pass her the salt. You always got everything first, Victoria, she said, her voice sharp with years of resentment. The grades, the job, the apartment. For once, I got something before you did. My fiancé wasn't a prize to be won, I replied, my voice shaking with anger. He was the man I loved and trusted. Mom put down her fork with deliberate care. Isabel Marie Hayes, apologize to your sister right now. For what? Being honest? Damien chose me. He loves me now. I stood, my napkin falling to my plate. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I'm sorry. It was the last family dinner I attended with Isabel present. Dad's heart problems worsened from the stress of his daughter's feud, requiring medication adjustments and additional doctor visits. Mom aged years in months, the lines around her eyes deepening as she tried desperately to hold her fractured family together. 6 months after discovering the betrayal, I hit rock bottom. My therapist diagnosed me with clinical depression and recommended medication. Work suffered as I struggled to focus, eventually losing a major client after a disastrous presentation where I broke down crying in front of the entire board. My boss suggested a leave of absence, but I knew that staying in Denver, where memories lurked around every corner, would only prolong my suffering. When a marketing director position opened in our Chicago branch, I applied immediately. The interview went surprisingly well, my desperation for change perhaps reading as enthusiasm. 2 weeks later, I received the offer. Mom helped me pack my apartment, carefully wrapping photos and mementos in tissue paper. As we sorted through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate, she broached the subject that hung between us like a storm cloud. Will you ever consider forgiving Isabel? She asked, sealing a box with packing tape. I continued folding sweaters without looking up. I don't know, Mom. Not now. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it, she said softly. It's about freeing yourself. I am freeing myself. I'm moving to Chicago. Mom sat beside me on the bed, taking my hands in hers. Running away isn't the same as healing, sweetheart. Tears filled my eyes. I need space to even begin to heal. Can you understand that? She nodded, pulling me into a tight hug. Promise you'll call. Promise you won't shut us out completely. I promise. Saying goodbye to my parents was harder than I'd anticipated. Dad held me longer than usual, his voice gruff with emotion. You show them, kiddo. Build a life so good they'll choke on their regret. My first weeks in Chicago were lonely and doubt-filled. My studio apartment felt sterile and unfamiliar. I worked long hours to avoid going home to empty rooms, eating takeout at my desk, and falling into bed exhausted each night. Then came the news that twisted the knife deeper. Mom called one Sunday morning, her voice careful and concerned. Victoria, I feel you should hear this from me rather than social media. Isabel and Damien got married yesterday. The small civil ceremony had been featured in Denver's Society magazine, Damien's business connections ensuring coverage despite the modest scale. The accompanying photo showed them beaming outside the courthouse. Isabel wearing a simple white dress, my former engagement ring prominently displayed on her finger. That night was my lowest point. I drank an entire bottle of wine alone, scrolled through old photos of Damien and me, and cried until my eyes swelled shut. I called in sick to work the next day, unable to face the world. But something shifted during those dark hours alone. As morning light filtered through my blinds, I made a decision. This would be the last day I gave them power over my happiness. I deleted all photos of Damien from my phone, blocked both him and Isabel on social media, and took the longest shower of my life, imagining my pain washing away down the drain. At work, I threw myself into projects with renewed focus. My boss noticed the change, assigning me to more significant clients. I developed a reputation for creativity and dedication, earning respect in my new office. My first real Chicago friend was Madison Reynolds, our HR director, who invited me to join her book club. Through her, I met other women, slowly building a social circle. Madison frequently tried to set me up on dates, but I declined each offer. The thought of romantic vulnerability still terrified me. 4 months into my Chicago life, I was sent to a technology conference in San Francisco to represent our company. On the second evening, I attended a business dinner with potential clients. I was seated next to Alexander Kane, a tech investor and entrepreneur who had recently relocated from Seattle. Alexander was different from Damien in every way. Where Damien had been flashy and commanding, Alexander was understated and genuine. His quiet confidence drew people in without demanding attention. When he spoke about his work, His passion was evident but never boastful. He listened more than he talked, asked thoughtful questions, and had this way of making whoever he was speaking with feel like the most interesting person in the room. He asked for my card after dinner, and I gave it without expectation. To my surprise, he emailed the next morning, asking if I'd like to continue our conversation about digital marketing trends over coffee before the day's sessions. Over the next 3 months, Alexander and I maintained professional contact. He referred clients to my agency, and I introduced him to my Chicago business connections. Madison noticed our frequent work lunches and raised an eyebrow. "He likes you, Victoria," she said one afternoon, organizing files in her office. "And not just professionally." "We're just colleagues," I insisted, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. "Colleagues don't look at each other the way he looks at you," Madison replied with a knowing smile. Eventually, Alexander asked me to dinner at a restaurant completely unrelated to work. I panicked, almost canceling twice before forcing myself to go. 20 minutes into the date, while discussing our favorite books, I had a full-blown panic attack. My hands shook uncontrollably, breathing became difficult, and tears welled in my eyes. Instead of being embarrassed or annoyed, Alexander moved to sit beside me in the booth, speaking calmly until my breathing normalized. He drove me home without pressure or questions. The next day, flowers arrived at my office with a note, "No pressure, no expectations. Just hoping you're feeling better, Alexander." That evening, I called him and shared everything about Damien and Isabel. He listened without interruption, then shared his own story of heartbreak, his previous marriage that ended when his wife left him for his business partner, taking half their joint company in the divorce. "Broken trust leaves scars," he said quietly. "Anyone worth your time will understand that healing isn't linear." Over the following months, we built a foundation of friendship first. Alexander never pushed for more than I could give, respecting my boundaries while remaining steadfastly present. For our 5th date, he cooked dinner at his apartment instead of taking me to a crowded restaurant that might trigger my anxiety. When panic occasionally resurfaced, he knew exactly how to help me through it. For the first time since Damien, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, trust was possible again. 1 year after moving to Chicago, I barely recognized my life. My promotion to senior marketing director came with a corner office overlooking the river. My circle of friends had expanded beyond Madison to include several close confidants, and most surprisingly, I had fallen deeply in love with Alexander. Unlike Damien's flashy courtship, Alexander's love manifested in consistent, thoughtful ways. He remembered small details like how I preferred oat milk in my coffee and which true crime podcasts I followed. He respected my independence while offering unwavering support. Most importantly, he never compared me to anyone else or tried to change me. I met Alexander's sister Caroline during her visit from Portland. We connected immediately, exchanging numbers and developing our own friendship independent of Alexander. She told me stories of their childhood in Seattle, painting a picture of the boy who became the man I was growing to love. My relationship with my parents continued from a distance. I called Mom weekly, carefully steering conversations away from Isabel. Dad occasionally joined these calls, his gruff voice softening when he told me how proud he was of my fresh start. I visited twice that year, timing my trips when I knew Isabel and Damien would be away. Mom provided occasional updates about them. Their marriage appeared perfect on social media, Isabel posting photos of luxury vacations and charity galas. According to Mom, they had purchased a large house in the most exclusive part of Denver and were renovating extensively. "Isabel asks about you sometimes," Mom mentioned during one call. "What do you tell her?" I asked, stirring pasta sauce on my stove. "That you're doing well, that you're building a new life." "Does she ever express regret?" Mom sighed. "In her way. She gets quiet when your name comes up." My therapy continued in Chicago, my new therapist helping me process the betrayal and build healthier relationship patterns. I learned to recognize my triggers and communicate boundaries effectively. Slowly, the nightmares about Damien and Isabel faded. In June, Alexander surprised me with a weekend trip to Michigan's wine country. We stayed at a charming bed and breakfast surrounded by vineyards, spent afternoons wine tasting, and watched the sunset over Lake Michigan. For the first time in years, I felt completely present and happy, without the shadow of past betrayal hanging over me. On our last evening, walking through the gardens at a local winery, Alexander stopped beneath a trellis covered in climbing roses. "Victoria," he said, taking both my hands in his, "this past year, knowing you, has been the greatest gift of my life." When he knelt, producing a ring box from his pocket, panic flashed briefly. Images of Damien's proposal threatened to overshadow this moment, but looking into Alexander's eyes, I saw only sincerity and love. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said, seeming to read my hesitation. "I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next year, I'll be here." Tears filled my eyes, but not from fear or pain. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm ready now." The ring was nothing like the ostentatious diamond Damien had given me. A simple emerald with small diamonds on either side, elegant and understated, like our relationship. That night, I called my parents with the news. Mom cried happy tears. "He sounds wonderful, darling," she said through her emotion. "When can we meet him?" "Soon," I promised. "Very soon." We planned a small wedding, only 30 guests at a historic Chicago venue. At Mom's gentle urging, I sent Isabel an invitation, more as a gesture toward healing than an expectation of attendance. Her response came via email, brief and cold. "Congratulations on your engagement. Unfortunately, Damien and I have prior commitments on that date. Best wishes for your future." Mom was disappointed but unsurprised. "Give her time, Victoria. This is progress compared to where you both were." Our wedding day arrived, intimate and joyful, with my parents, new friends, and Alexander's family in attendance. Dad walked me down the aisle, whispering, "I haven't seen you this happy in years, kiddo." Alexander's vows acknowledged our journey. "Victoria, I promise to remember that love is both strong and fragile, requiring care and commitment every day. I promise to be worthy of the trust you've given me, knowing how precious and hard-won that gift is." We built our life together in Chicago, buying a brownstone that we renovated together. My career continued advancing, eventually leading to a vice president position. Alexander's investment firm grew, focusing on supporting women-led tech startups. During a dinner with business associates, I learned something that connected past to present. A venture capitalist mentioned working with Damien years earlier. Cross? Yeah, he and Kane had quite the rivalry in the angel investing space about 7 years back. Kane backed the right startup. Cross backed the competitor. Kane's pick got acquired for millions. Cross went bankrupt. Later that night, I asked Alexander about this connection. "I was going to tell you eventually," he admitted. "I knew who you were when we met at that conference, not the details of what happened, but that you had been engaged to Cross. Why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted you to know me for me, not as someone connected to your past." I wasn't angry. Somehow the cosmic symmetry felt right. 2 years into our marriage, we began trying for a baby. Months passed without success, leading to fertility specialists and difficult conversations. Through disappointments and medical procedures, Alexander remained my rock, holding me through tears and reminding me that family comes in many forms. Then came the devastating call about Mom's cancer diagnosis. Alexander and I flew to Denver immediately, meeting with oncologists and helping my parents navigate treatment options. Mom put on a brave face, but the cancer was aggressive and had already spread. I took a leave from work to care for her, moving temporarily back to my childhood home. Alexander flew in every weekend, supporting both me and my increasingly frail father. In her final weeks, Mom and I had precious conversations about life, love, and family. One evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she broached the subject of Isabel. "I wish you girls could find peace with each other," she said, her voice weak but determined. "Life is too short for such distance between sisters." "I know, Mom," I replied, swallowing back tears. "Promise me you'll try, Victoria. Not for her, but for yourself, and maybe a little bit for your old mother." I promised, not knowing if I could keep it, but wanting to give her peace. Mom passed peacefully 3 days later, Alexander, Dad, and I at her bedside. I called Isabel immediately, the first direct communication we'd had in years. "Mom's gone," I said when she answered. Her sharp intake of breath was the only sound for several seconds. "I'll be there in an hour," she finally replied, her voice breaking. We met at our parents' house, hugging briefly and awkwardly before turning our attention to Dad and funeral arrangements. The real test would come at the funeral itself, where years of hurt and anger would collide with fresh grief and Mom's final wish. The morning of Mom's funeral dawned gray and drizzly, fitting the somber occasion. I stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, adjusting my black dress and wondering how I would survive the day ahead. Alexander appeared behind me, handsome in his dark suit, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "I'm right beside you today," he said, meeting my eyes in the reflection. "Whatever happens." Dad sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his untouched coffee. The past week had hollowed him out, his tall frame suddenly stooped with grief. At 72, he seemed to have aged a decade since Mom's diagnosis. "Ready, Dad?" I asked softly, touching his shoulder. He nodded, rising slowly. "Catherine always said funerals aren't for the dead. They're for the living. Never understood that until now." The funeral home was already filling with extended family and friends when we arrived. I stayed close to Dad, greeting people with mechanical smiles and accepting condolences from faces I barely recognized. Cousins from California, Mom's college roommate, neighbors from throughout my parents' 40 years in their home. "You look just like Catherine at your age," my great-aunt Patricia said, patting my cheek. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become." As I guided Dad to his seat in the front row, Alexander at his other side, a murmur rippled through the gathering. I turned to see Isabel and Damien entering, their appearance causing heads to turn and whispers to spread. Isabel wore an expensive black dress that highlighted her slender figure, diamond earrings catching the light. Damien looked uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit, his arm around my sister's waist in a show of support. Her left hand rested prominently on her purse, the massive diamond engagement ring and wedding band impossible to miss. Dad stiffened beside me. "Thomas, breathe," I whispered, concerned about his heart. They made their way forward, stopping to speak with various attendees. I kept my eyes front, focusing on the large photo of Mom displayed beside her closed casket. Her warm smile eased some of my anxiety. Eventually, they reached the front. Isabel embraced Dad, who returned the hug stiffly. Damien shook his hand, receiving only a curt nod in response. "Victoria," Isabel said, turning to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I replied simply, not trusting myself with more words. Damien nodded awkwardly. "Sorry for your loss." Alexander had stepped away to speak with the funeral director, leaving me momentarily alone with them. Isabel seized the opportunity. "I need to speak with you privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Against my better judgment, I followed her, wanting to avoid a scene at Mom's funeral. The small room contained only a few chairs and a box of tissues, clearly designated for mourners needing private moments. Isabel closed the door behind us. Up close, I noticed fine lines around her eyes that her expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. "You look thin," she remarked, her gaze assessing me critically. "Grief does that," I replied flatly. She fiddled with her ring, twisting it around her finger. "Damien and I bought a summer house on Cape Cod last month, 8 bedrooms, private beach access." I remained silent, wondering why she felt compelled to share this information. "We're considering starting a family soon," she continued. "Damien's company just acquired 2 startups, and we're renovating the 3rd floor for a nursery." "Congratulations," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss about the funeral arrangements?" Her smile turned sharp. "I just thought you might want to know how well we're doing. Poor you, still alone at 38. The familiar pain flared briefly, then subsided. 6 years ago, her words would have devastated me. Today, they seemed pathetic and desperate. I smiled genuinely. "Have you met my husband yet?" Her expression faltered. "Husband?" "Alexander," I called, opening the door to find him waiting nearby. "Come meet my sister." As Alexander entered the room, Damien appeared behind him, clearly having been watching our interaction. When the men made eye contact, Damien's face drained of color. "Kane," he said, his confident demeanor cracking. "Cross." Alexander's tone remained professional but cool. "It's been, 7 years? Not since Macintosh acquired Innotech instead of your client CompuServe, right?" Damien swallowed visibly. "You 2 are married?" 2 wonderful years now," I confirmed, slipping my hand into Alexander's. Alexander Kane, Isabel repeated slowly. As in Kane Investments? The same, Alexander replied. Damien attempted to recover his composure. Kane, we should catch up sometime. I've been meaning to reach out about potential collaborations. My schedule's quite full, Alexander replied pleasantly but firmly, but you can contact my office if you'd like. The funeral director appeared, informing us the service was about to begin. As we returned to the main room, whispers followed us. The connection between Alexander and Damien was clearly known in business circles. We had just taken our seats when Dad clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. "Dad!" I cried as Alexander immediately called for help. We moved Dad to a private room, the funeral temporarily delayed. A doctor among the attendees examined him, determining it was likely stress and not another heart attack. Isabel followed us, genuine concern on her face. "Is he okay? Should we call an ambulance?" "The doctor says he's stable," I replied, surprised by her sincerity. Just overwhelmed. For 20 tense minutes, we sat together in awkward silence, united only by concern for our father. When he insisted on proceeding with the service, we returned to the main room, the brief crisis creating an unexpected truce. The funeral itself was beautiful and heartbreaking. I delivered a eulogy highlighting Mom's kindness, strength, and unwavering love for her family. When Isabel rose to speak after me, she faltered after only a few sentences, tears overwhelming her. Without thinking, I moved to her side, placing a supportive hand on her back. "It's okay," I whispered. "Take your time." She gathered herself, completing her tribute to our mother with stories from our childhood that brought both tears and gentle laughter from the attendees. At the cemetery, rain fell softly as we laid Mom to rest. I noticed Damien standing apart from the main group, checking his watch repeatedly. Isabel remained by Dad's side, her earlier bravado replaced by genuine grief. The reception at my parents' house was crowded with well-wishers, bringing casseroles and sharing memories. Damien drank heavily, his discomfort evident as several business associates engaged Alexander in animated conversation. I overheard fragments about Damien's company struggling with recent acquisitions and wondered if Isabel's boasting had been covering financial troubles. Throughout the day, I maintained the dignity Mom would have expected, focusing on supporting Dad and honoring her memory rather than dwelling on old wounds. As guests began departing, I caught Isabel watching me from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but somehow softer than before. The day after the funeral, Alexander needed to return to Chicago for an important board meeting. "Are you sure you'll be okay if I go?" he asked, packing his overnight bag. "I can reschedule." "Dad needs help sorting through Mom's things," I explained. "I should stay a few more days. I'll be fine." After seeing Alexander off at the airport, I returned to my parents' house to find Dad sitting in Mom's garden, a photo album open on his lap. "She labeled everything," he said, showing me Mom's neat handwriting beneath each photo. Said someday we'd appreciate knowing who was who. That afternoon, I began the painful task of sorting through Mom's closet. Each dress held memories, the blue one from my college graduation, the floral print she wore to Sunday brunches, the elegant gray she'd chosen for my engagement party. I found myself talking to her as I worked, telling her about my life in Chicago, my work, my happiness with Alexander. In her bedside drawer, I discovered a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, Mom had written periodic entries over the past decade. Many mentioned her daughters, her hopes for our reconciliation, her sadness at the rift between us. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death, read, "My greatest regret is leaving with my girls still estranged. Catherine always fixed things, but I couldn't fix this. I pray they find their way back to each other somehow." The doorbell rang as I wiped away tears. Through the front window, I saw Isabel standing alone on the porch, no sign of Damien's car in the driveway. Dad had gone to his brother's house for dinner, leaving me to face my sister alone. I opened the door, uncertain what to expect. "Hi," she said simply. "Can I come in?" In the kitchen, I made coffee while Isabel sat silently at the table. She looked different without Damien beside her, smaller somehow, less artificially composed. "Where's Damien?" I finally asked, placing a mug before her. "At home. He doesn't know I'm here." She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't drink. I told him I needed space after the funeral. The silence stretched between us, years of unspoken words creating an almost physical barrier. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she finally said. "What I said in that room at the funeral home, it was cruel and completely inappropriate." I nodded, acknowledging her apology without immediately accepting it. "I saw Mom's journal," she continued. "Dad showed it to me last night. Her last wish was for us to reconcile." "I found it too," I replied. "But reconciliation requires more than just proximity, Isabel. It needs honesty." She looked up, tears filling her eyes. "You want honesty?" "Here's honesty. I'm miserable, Victoria. Have been almost since the beginning." The dam broke then, words pouring out between sobs. Damien had changed shortly after their wedding, becoming controlling and critical. His business had been struggling for years, each new acquisition an attempt to save a sinking ship. The houses, the cars, the vacations, all leveraged on mounting debt. Their marriage was a carefully constructed facade, maintained for business connections and social standing. He monitored her spending, checked her phone, questioned her every movement. "The Damien you knew doesn't exist anymore," she admitted. "Maybe he never did." "Why stay?" I asked. "Shame," she answered immediately. "How could I admit what I'd done to you? Destroyed our family for something that turned out to be a mirage, and then there's the prenup. I leave with nothing." I pushed Mom's journal across the table. "Read the rest of her entries." As Isabel read, fresh tears flowed. She looked up eventually, her face raw with emotion. "She knew," Isabel whispered. "She saw through everything." "Mom always did," I agreed. "I've hated myself for years," Isabel said, her voice barely audible. "Every time Mom mentioned you, every accomplishment of yours she proudly shared, I felt the weight of what I'd done." "I'm planning to leave him, Victoria. I've been secretly consulting a lawyer." My feelings were complicated, vindication mixed with unexpected compassion. The sister who had caused me such pain was suffering consequences I wouldn't have wished on anyone. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know the truth before I blow up my life again." We spent the next hours looking through Mom's belongings together, sharing memories both painful and precious. Isabel recalled Mom teaching us to bake cookies, how she never made separate batches because I liked chocolate chip, and Isabel preferred sugar cookies. "Remember how she used to leave notes in our lunch boxes?" Isabel asked, smiling through tears. "Different messages every day." I nodded. "She never repeated one." We weren't instantly healed, the wounds too deep for immediate closure. But as evening fell, something had shifted between us. Mom's love had created a fragile bridge across years of hurt. "What will you do?" I asked as Isabel prepared to leave. "File for divorce when my lawyer says the timing is right. Rent a small apartment. Start over." She paused at the door. "What about you? Will you go back to Chicago?" "Yes, my life is there now with Alexander." "You seem happy," she said, a statement rather than a question. "I am. Truly happy. I'm glad. One of us should be." We hugged briefly, awkwardly, before she left. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Back in Chicago, I settled into life with Alexander, our brownstone, and my rewarding career. 6 months after Mom's funeral, I discovered I was pregnant. After years of trying, the joy was tempered with sadness that Mom wouldn't meet her grandchild but I felt her presence in quiet moments. Isabel and I maintained cautious contact through occasional phone calls. She had filed for divorce and moved into a modest apartment, finding work at a small marketing firm. The gossip and judgment she faced in Denver's social circles was difficult, but she seemed determined to rebuild authentically. The path that led me here was never one I would have chosen. Losing Damien had seemed like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of a far better one. With Alexander, I found not just love, but partnership, respect, and unwavering support. His success never overshadowed mine, but complemented it, each of us growing stronger together. Mom had been right about forgiveness being for ourselves rather than others. The weight of anger and resentment had lifted gradually, allowing me to see my past with clarity and my future with hope. The scars remained, but they no longer defined me. As I sat in our nursery, Alexander painting the walls a soft green, I thought about the lessons I would someday share with our child. How loss can lead to finding. How endings create space for beginnings. How the hardest moments often direct us toward our truest path. My life had become richer and more authentic than I could have imagined during those dark days 6 years ago. Not despite the betrayal, but because of how it forced me to rebuild with greater wisdom and intention. Standing at Mom's funeral that day, watching Isabel's face drain of color when she realized exactly who I'd married, I understood that sometimes the universe has a twist sense of justice. Damien had thought he was trading up when he chose my sister over me. What he'd actually done was hand me the keys to a life beyond his comprehension, a life with a man whose success dwarfed his own, whose character made him look like a child, and whose love made me realize what I'd mistaken for love before had been nothing more than infatuation with an illusion. The best revenge, I learned, isn't carefully plotted or deliberately executed. Sometimes it's simply living so well that your betrayers choke on their regret every time they hear your name. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes with the added bonus of watching them realize that what they thought was their greatest victory was actually their most catastrophic defeat. Have you ever experienced a painful loss that eventually led you to something better? Sometimes the most difficult chapters lead to the most beautiful endings, and pain doesn't get the final word in our stories. We do. Subscribe for more stories like this.